The presidential election in the U.S. has been polarizing people on social media for several months, and it's been a tough few weeks also with hot-button issues being shared online, the letter from the rape victim on Stanford's campus, news of the shootings in Orlando, and now almost perfunctory arguments about the Second Amendment. I've heard from many people who just want to turn off social media because of all the ways it triggers us, so I decided it was time to talk to an expert. Welcome back, Ellen Hendrickson, clinical psychologist and podcast host of the Savvy Psychologist on the Quick and Dirty Tips Network. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back on the show.
So we all like keeping up with friends and family on social media, but some of us would rather not see endless arguments about politics or horrible news stories that we might be better off not knowing about. Do you have any advice for people who don't want to delete their accounts?
Sure. There is a lot you can do before you delete your account. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And so luckily, there are a lot of different variables that we can tweak. And so the most obvious is that you can do it simply by time, just by spending less time on the sites, of course. But you can also do it by intimacy. And that sounds weird, but you might consider using one network, maybe Facebook or Instagram, for just your true friends and family. Make it a really private, safer space for you. And then you might consider using a different network, say like Twitter or something else, for like as your public network, something that you can really use to take all comers. And so you get a space that's kind of cleaned up for you and more private, and another that can be more for whatever use. And of course, you can also do it by cherry picking within each site. So you can weed out news organizations, you can follow sources of positive news like Upworthy or like the Huffington Post's good news section. And of course, with your friends, at least on Facebook, you can always unfollow without unfriending. So they don't know that you've blocked them. It's just the unfollow.
That's what you do, Jason. You're really good about keeping your accounts. Like you have one for public facing and one just for more private family. Do you think that helps?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had my Facebook account open for a few years when I kind of started doing the whole podcast thing. And then, I got my Twitter account. And for a while, my Twitter account was feeding into my Facebook because there were a lot of the same people here and there. But there was also a lot of family and close friends on Facebook. And at a certain point, I had one of my really good friends basically tell me, like, I think I'm going to unfriend you because I just do not care about the technology stuff. And I was like, well, that's a big bummer because I actually really enjoy seeing all of that personal stuff. And I also enjoy sharing personal stuff with people I care about, but I don't need everybody to see that. And so I went through a pretty long process of peeling it down and saying, I'm sorry, but I'm booting a lot of you and you can follow me over there and don't take it personally. And yeah, I use Facebook for my personal stuff and it's great. It makes it usable to me.
So what about muting or unfriending people? I mean, do you think that causes more of an echo chamber for us? And isn't it benefit us to see sometimes things that we disagree with?
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it's important to remember that there are degrees, that if you're muting or unfriending people who really disagree with you, but do it in a thoughtful manner, you may lose out on a diversity of viewpoints. But if you mute or unfriend somebody who's inflammatory or creates an unhealthy response in you, that might actually be a wise step. And so a nice rule of thumb is to think about social media as your home on the web. And you wouldn't invite someone into your actual home who was rude or bigoted or disrespectful. And so you don't have to invite them into your social media home either.
So when do you know when it might be time to delete your accounts? I mean, I know I've looked at stuff that, especially about this rape case at Stanford, it was triggering me all over the place, like as a woman, as a mother of a daughter and of boys, and it was like all of this stuff coming at me. And I know it wasn't necessarily about the case at all. It was about just, how I see myself as a parent and how I'm parenting. So it was helpful to a point, and then it just got exhausting. How do you know when it's time to stop?
Sure. So I think just a nice, easy rule is when you log off feeling worse than when you logged on, that's information right there. And these spaces are supposed to make us feel connected, not triggered. And so when you're offline, another good rule of thumb is if you are getting what's called intrusive thoughts, so meaning like negative thoughts or images that are just popping into your head unbidden, even when you're trying not to have them, that can be a cue to maybe take a little social media fast.
So what do you think about this new feature that we talked about it a little bit last week, where Facebook will not be scanning people's posts for suicidal posts, but they have a team devoted to people reporting, hey, someone just posted something that sounded like they were suicidal, reporting it and then responding to the friend on telling the friend how to respond. What do you think of that?
I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist. I think it's a great feature. I mean, it's the numbers of suicides in the U.S. are at their highest numbers in 30 years. So something needs to be done. And of course, this isn't going to fix things. But I think, so like you said, the new feature helps people report posts that seem like suicide notes. And so Facebook reviews the posts, like they rely on the other people to flag them, but then they review the post and they offer resources to both parties. So for the person who's flagging the concerning post, they get resources to help reach out to that friend. They get the option to bring in a mutual friend, so both of them can help. And then Facebook also offers language, because often people just don't know what to say in this case. Like who would know what to say? And so Facebook offers some language that you can use, but you don't have to. You can type over it and put in your own words as well. And then for the person who posted the concerning post, something that seems like it might be suicidal, Facebook will also reach out and offer resources for them to talk with a friend, offer a helpline, and other sources of support. So I like that they're supporting both parties. And again, it's a huge problem. So I'm glad Facebook is taking a stand and doing something about it.
So let's move on to kids and social media. I think so many kids who have phones are getting all of this news that we're talking about on different mediums. I know my kids often get it through Snapchat, which is, I don't even know what they're seeing. I mean, beyond everyone talks about, you don't know what your kids are sending on Snapchat. You also don't know what they're reading. There's no browser history to check. And as parents, I think, who understand technology, we know we don't depend on checking their browser history. You have to talk to them. But what about the kids that are getting all this news? And they're not just the fact that they're getting it, but they're getting it often alone in their bedroom with their iPhone, or maybe just sitting in the car next to you on their iPhone, which is almost worse, it seems like, because you're not alone, but alone with this news. What do you think about that?
Sure. I think, so there was a Pew Research Center study that came out, I think, earlier this year, and it found that over 90% of parents have talked to their kids about like what's appropriate to, or like how to act appropriately online, like what to engage with online. And so luckily parents seem to be willing to have these conversations. But I think the directive of talk to your kids is so broad. That's such a broad instruction that it leaves a lot of parents feeling paralyzed. Like that's just such a huge thing to have to do. So I would say narrow it down to, especially about events like, say, the Orlando shooting, find out how your kids are feeling. So just check in with them and see how they're doing. And to do that, you might start with a disclosure of your own. You could say something like, man, the Orlando shooting is still on my mind. It's been making me so sad all week. Or you could say something like, oh, this might sound irrational, but when I was in this crowded area a few days ago, I felt a little scared. And then with that disclosure, you can turn it on them and say, how are you doing? Because usually a disclosure can beget a disclosure. And then if they give you anything, which they might not, certainly if they're teenagers, but if they do, just listen. It's important not to try to fix whatever they say. It's important not to try to shut down any negative feelings, even though it might distress you to hear that they're anxious or sad or whatever. But so, don't say things like, oh, you'll be fine, or, oh, don't worry. Instead, just show them that you get it. Show them that you're there and that you're a safe person to talk to. And then after you've heard them out, try to leave them with a sense of safety. So you can talk about probability versus possibility. So while it's possible that shootings could happen in your town or to them possible, it's not probable. Despite what you see on the news, these things are actually rare. That's why they make the news. You can also talk about not living in fear. So a good response is to emphasize that it's important to keep living our lives, to work to change things for the better. And of course, you can always remind them that the vast majority of people are good and kind people.
Yes, good reminder. So obviously the interaction of social networks and just being focused on a device that's always in our pocket, let's say, depending on how old a kid is or whatever, this is a somewhat new event. 10 years ago, we didn't have an analog to this necessarily. We had computers on a desk. That didn't follow you every single place that you go. That wasn't there in the car when you're riding with your parents for that impulse to always look and check in on these social networks. Do we know, I mean, I'm sure there have been studies to this effect, but is there any sort of effect on kids and emotions and just kind of their stability, let's say, with all of this interaction, with this kind of impulsive environment that we have around technology?
Sure. No, I think that's a really great question. And then, so there, surprisingly, there is not that much information about how kids interact with events, with current news events. But if if one of your viewers finds anything, I'm interested to know. But most of the research is on the impact of social comparisons. So kids use social media, of course, to socialize and also to kind of build an identity, to try out different ways of presenting themselves to the world. But that often, can lead to kids comparing their real lives, with all the highlights and lowlights, to the carefully curated highlight reel that celebrities or even their friends are posting. So they compare, and it turns into a competition. They compete for likes, they compete for comments, and it creates this environment of trying to win, of trying to be better than others. And that constant comparison, scrolling through that, calculating likes, alone in your bedroom or next to you in the car, trying to turn it into a competition, that's likely just as harmful in a different way than all these terrible news stories.